Due to mature content, viewer discretion is advised.
She was a very loving little girl. And she cared about people. She wanted to be famous and then die young. So she had already made her plans.
I think all of us have been through that rebellious stage when we didn't like anybody telling us what to do, but most of us come through it.
But she knew no fear because she was always taken care of.
A Girl Interrupted, the case of Beth Ellen Vinson. Tonight, a comprehensive look at one of Raleigh's oldest and most baffling unsolved murders of all time. NC Wanted in high definition starts now.
Good evening, I'm Gerald Owens. Welcome to this special edition of NC Wanted. Tonight we devote our entire show to the unsolved murder of Beth Ellen Vinson. It started in the summer of 1994. Beth Ellen decided to leave the safety of her home and family. She made Raleigh her first stop. There she would bide time, make a little money, then launch herself to New York, where she would fulfill her dream of dancing on Broadway. But her first stop became her last. And after all these years, investigators and family members are still haunted by what happened to this headstrong girl with talent, promise, and an unfulfilled dream.
She wanted to be famous and then die young. So she had already made her plans, but we were hoping she'd grow old.
She was really a very unique child. She wouldn't walk through the den. She'd have to plie through the den, you know. And every night after dance class, if she would learn a new step, she would take me out back on the patio, perform that new step.
She'd have to show Daddy her new step.
Beth Ellen Vinson is a dancer, a small-town beauty queen with big plans. It's the summer of 1994, and she's approaching her senior year in high school, but she's growing impatient. Beth Ellen has dreamed of fame on Broadway for as long as she can remember, and Goldsboro can no longer hold her. On a sunny afternoon in early July, she walks out of the house and doesn't look back.
So I was sitting on the hearth in front of the fireplace, and she'd gotten some of her things, and she said, "I'm leaving." And I said, "You're making the biggest mistake of your life." And she said, "I might be, Mama, but I have to go."
Beth Ellen's dreams of making it on her own are short-lived. 6 weeks after she moves to Raleigh, police knock on the Vinsons' door. Their daughter's car was found abandoned, blocking the entrance to a car dealership with the radio blaring and the window rolled down. The only sign of Beth Ellen was a right shoe lying on the floorboard.
As the day wore on, it became fairly obvious that there was more involved than simply somebody who was had left their car somewhere, that there was probably some foul play involved. And by the time I came in at 3 o'clock, there was kind of a feeling that was starting to swell that there was more to the case than just a missing girl.
What could have happened? Why she could have left her car? Could she have gone to New York or something? That was our thread, I think, of hope. All her dance stuff was in her car, and everything was right there.
All of her clothes.
So that was a terrible week.
Already reeling from their daughter's disappearance, Bill and Penny Vinson discover Beth Ellen has been working for an escort service. She told them she was working at a grocery store, but that was a lie. After moving to Raleigh, Beth Ellen claimed she was 18 and signed on at the Class Act escort service out of Virginia Beach. She hoped to quickly save enough money to move to New York City.
Her job was to do private dances for those that called. And as a 17-year-old, that, and from my perspective, would be a really difficult way to live.
I was devastated. I couldn't believe it. I tried to picture my daughter doing that, and the picture wouldn't focus. It was like she had finally desecrated everything that we stood for. You know, finally, she has stepped on across the line, that she has said to me, all the things that you find holy are for nothing.
The week she's missing, it rains nearly every day, and temperatures top 90 degrees. Investigators search for any sign of Beth Ellen and prepare to dredge a nearby creek. Exactly 1 week later, a businessman makes a gruesome discovery on his way to work.
I think she was a major on the police force. Told her who I was and what I wanted to know, and she said, "Mr. Vinson, I don't know how to tell you this," she said, "but we have just found a body." I said, "Well, could I see her? Could I identify her?" And they said, "No, her body is so badly decomposed that we don't think you'd like to see her. And even if it was her, you probably couldn't recognize her anyway."
The evidence at the crime scene indicated that she was stabbed repeatedly, everywhere, violently stabbed.
This is kind of a cloudy time for me the next few days. I just couldn't believe it. It was just beyond the realm of comprehension for me. I just couldn't face it. Beth Ellen was dead.
On the night she disappears, Beth Ellen and her boyfriend, Ricky Heath, are alone together in the apartment. They're watching the movie Basic Instinct when the escort service calls, summoning her to the Innkeeper Motel on Capitol Boulevard.
The last time she left that apartment, the intended purpose was to drive to the Innkeeper Hotel to visit the subject at room 118.
Her car is found about 1.5 miles from the motel. The client she was going to visit, a middle-aged man from Myrtle Beach, was on a binge of drinking, drugs, and prostitutes. In the early stages of the investigation, he can't tell police for sure whether he's ever seen Beth Ellen Vinson.
It was a violent crime. Probably fairly quick attack that took place beside that building. And I don't think there's any doubt that the victim fought, but that at some point in time she was simply overwhelmed.
To be taken in such a violent way, there's no justice. There's no justice. And
Well, what I was going to say was that she did not deserve to be butchered on a ditch bank and left like a
animal.
Not even an animal deserves that.
There were pretty much two prime targets of the investigation, and they were the person that she had left and the person that she was going to see. A complication to the case initially was the fact that that individual had called a number of services and had interacted with a number of different females that night. It could have been the boyfriend because the boyfriend did this, or the boyfriend acted like that, or he said this, and that's really strange. Or it could be the guy at the hotel because he did this, or he has this in his history, or now he's living somewhere else and he's done that. And there's any number of things you can speculate about, but the reality of it is that you have to come back to the evidence.
It takes cross-country interviews and countless hours going over statements and search warrants, but months into the investigation, detectives finally conclude that Beth Ellen never made it to the motel that night.
So the emphasis then went to the boyfriend.
She would not have stopped for somebody she didn't know. She would not have pulled over into a parking lot to stop for somebody she didn't know. And she would not have left the door open, the radio playing, and a shoe in the car if she hadn't been taken from that car.
Investigators intensified their focus on Ricky Heath, who they had considered a suspect since the morning her car was found, and for a very specific reason.
The officer that responded out there was in the process of talking to the car dealer management when the victim's boyfriend arrived on the scene.
Claiming that he was out looking for Beth Ellen, Heath shows up at the car dealership parking lot shortly after police arrive. He knew where she was going when she left their apartment hours earlier, but her car was abandoned just south of the Beltline. And to get to the motel, she would have gotten off on the northbound exit.
Him finding the vehicle is very suspicious, I'll grant you that, and that causes a lot of people problems when they just scratch the surface of this case.
How did he find the car? You know, why was he there? It's not really in view of the route you would normally take coming off the Beltline, going north on Capitol Boulevard. If he had taken that route, he wouldn't have even been able to see her car, even if he had been looking for it.
Beth Ellen leaves the apartment sometime before 2:30 in the morning. Heath's roommates claim they returned sometime around 3 a.m., leaving Heath without an alibi for an undetermined period of time after Beth Ellen left. The couple had been seeing each other since she moved to Raleigh, and he told family members Beth Ellen was the love of his life.
I think she was exciting to him. I think that he just thought she was, just had kind of a spark about her that maybe he hadn't seen before.
It's not clear whether Beth Ellen was ready to settle down, especially given her ambitions of fame. Before she ran away, the Vinsons supported Beth Ellen's plans, even going so far as to promise to pay for an apartment in New York if she would finish high school and obey their rules. She couldn't wait and tried to do it on her own. But the escort service business wasn't the one-way ticket to Broadway she imagined.
She was not going to become a millionaire and live the life of Riley on what she made for this escort service now.
Things weren't getting easier for her, it seemed like. She didn't have money, she didn't hardly have a place to stay. She was getting frightened, and so she very well could have cut her losses and gone back home and said, "Will you take me back?" She might have had to swallow some pride, but I think she was concerned that she was in over her head.
Now, she's gullible enough to get into something over her head. I'm sure of that. But she's sensible enough to try to get out, and maybe that's what she was doing when she left the apartment that night with her clothes in the car.
From everything I learned through this investigation, it became clear to me that Beth Ellen's intention in the week leading up to her death was to return to Southern Wayne High School and finish her last year of high school.
Ricky Heath fails a polygraph police give him shortly after Beth Ellen's car is found, but continues to insist he has nothing to do with her disappearance. He's initially interrogated, but returns to the Goldsboro area while police search for any sign of Beth Ellen.
According to all the reports that we had, spent a lot of time hanging around the house of a relative, spent a lot of time washing his car, just spent a lot of time laying around the house.
Police struggle with determining a motive for the murder. Beth Ellen has very little in the way of cash and valuables, so robbery is unlikely. And although detectives can't be certain, they don't think Beth Ellen was sexually assaulted.
Based on the crime scene, I'd say there was a very strong possibility that she was not.
There's never been any evidence that indicates that this was a sexually motivated crime in any way, shape, form, or fashion.
So that leaves some to believe that the only motivation behind Beth Ellen Vinson's murder is rage, plain and simple, and that leads them to one man.
I think Beth Ellen made somebody really, really mad, and he put an end to the argument.
One of the policemen told us in this very room that they knew who did it. All they had to do was prove it, and then they were going to arrest him, and when they arrested him, they would come get us and take us down there. You know, that's how confident he was that they knew who did it.
In 2000, a detective with the Raleigh Police Department compiles everything he has on Ricky Heath and goes to the district attorney's office seeking murder charges. It's not enough, they say.
I feel like I know. The evidence doesn't prove it, or he would be behind bars. But in my heart of hearts, I feel like I know.
I think I'm about 98% sure. Not 100, but maybe 98% sure.
If you're found dead in the morning, statistically, who's the most likely person that did it? If you're a woman, it's your husband, your boyfriend, the last person that, spent the night with you, by a fairly large majority.
But those who support the theory that he did it face one significant problem. Not one shred of physical evidence links him to the crime.
There's a lot of differing opinions about how this case could or should be solved.
You can't take the evidence and say, okay, here's what I theorize, or this person was this type of killer because they did these things.
Right now, there's no evidence to identify a suspect and to convict a suspect, to bring charges on a suspect.
This is a capital crime. The person you put in jail could get the death penalty. And the last thing on earth I want, and the last thing on earth good detectives want, is the wrong person to be put to death for a crime they didn't commit.
If I was a homicide detective, you've got a boyfriend who has a motive, who has an opportunity, and suddenly shows up on the scene when they first find her car. Of course, he's the first person you're going to look at. But how could he not either crack or made some kind of mistake somewhere along the way that would allow some charges to go forward?
So in order to think that he is the suspect, you have to be willing to believe that he left his apartment on the spur of the moment. And he himself, not being that familiar with the city of Raleigh, that he was able to find her in her vehicle in the middle of the night, get her to stop on the side of the road, extract her from the vehicle, then take her a short distance away, brutally kill her, and then go back home, all before his roommates returned home. There just isn't anything there. No, I don't think he did it at all.
To make sense of why the case has gone cold, an opposing theory takes hold, which suggests Beth Ellen was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time.
This was a stranger. This was the boogeyman that people fear, the guy who's just out there and just a crime of opportunity. And he sees a young victim that's vulnerable, and he seizes upon that moment, and he takes advantage of it and exploits it. And she's in the wrong place at the wrong time, and she gets killed.
But in order to accept that theory, you must be willing to believe that Beth Ellen pulled her car over, which was operating perfectly, in the middle of the night, onto a desolate side road, and encountered a cold-blooded killer.
In the vast majority of cases, when you're looking at any question, any problem, the simplest solution is usually the correct solution. Paraphrased, I call it, the truth makes sense.
The reality of it is that we're 13 years down the road, and we are, in my opinion, no closer to catching this killer 13 years later than we were in the first few days of the investigation.
We've not ruled out anybody. And again, going back to what evidence we have, what evidence we need, there's certainly a gap there.
That's a sad fact that we have to deal with. It's one of the limitations that people who watch CSI and a lot of this other stuff on TV just need to realize. It's not a perfect world. The fact of the matter is, there are some cases that can never be conclusively proven because there's no fingerprint, there's no DNA, there's no blood spatter, you know, there's just not, the evidence ain't there. This case is never going to get any better.
So please welcome Miss Beth Vinson.
The Vinson family continues to hope that one day officers will be able to piece together what happened that night. And until then, they will struggle with a shattered sense of justice and an endless list of unanswered questions.
For me personally, it would be gratifying to let this family know, this is what happened to your daughter. This is who did that.
What you've got is you've got a 17-year-old young lady who didn't get to live out the rest of her life. And, you know, and that's painful. You know, that's brutal. What was actually done to the victim at the scene kind of pales in comparison to the potential that her life would have had.
The end of Beth Ellen's short life marked the beginning of a long and complex murder investigation. Over the last 13 years, Raleigh investigators have wrestled with murky timelines, questionable alibis, and a frustrating lack of physical evidence. We hope after watching tonight's show, you've come away with a fresh insight into this case. Perhaps you know someone who was involved. It could have been a friend or a friend of a friend. Maybe you overheard someone talking about it. Whatever it is, if you have any information about the unsolved murder of Beth Ellen Vinson, call us right now at 1-866-43-WANTED or log on to our website at ncwanted.com and click on Report a Tip. You don't have to give us your name. Remember, together we can fight to preserve the quality of life we hold dear in North Carolina. I'm Gerald Owens. Good night.